Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 92nd rendition of the 706 podcast. I'm your host for this episode. My name is Kirk. Let's go around. Everybody introduce themselves. Why don't we go in this order? Tony, Connor, and Anthony.
Hey guys, this is Tony.
Hello everyone. This is Connor. And my favorite film of Robert Zemeckis is, you guessed it, Beowulf. Said it last time, but even that is not as good as the video game Beowulf for the Xbox 360. Highly recommended. Go check it out.
Yep. And Anthony.
There we go. We got our movie licensed Xbox 360 reference out of the way. If we have extra time later, we can talk about the similarities between the Green Lantern and the first Thor games, which were both atrocious, but let's move on to the task at hand, which is to discuss the movie that I nominated and which was chosen by Connor, which is 2000's Castaway, starring Tom Hanks, Helen Hunt, directed by Robert Zemeckis. So let me back up a little bit. If this is your first time with us, first of all, welcome. Second of all, I can't imagine how you stumbled upon us, but if it's through our E2 Mama Tambien episode, there's far less nudity in this movie, but we will try to be nonetheless just as spicy. And yeah, the show, obviously, we aim to induct the 706 greatest films of all time. So this is our task. This is our burden on this astral plane, and we have to choose between yes or no for Castaway. Unfortunately, I don't get a vote. It will be up to my three co-hosts. And I think Anthony was the only one who had seen Castaway. Is that correct, Anthony? Or everybody else?
Yeah, I had last seen it in but it was during the Blockbuster days. So it's been some time.
So effectively, before Anthony's own cinema renaissance, as it were, he's now far more cultured and cynical. So let's see. Let's just kind of go in blind. I guess a quick recap. This movie is actually pretty easy to summarize. FedEx worker, while flying to Malaysia, cross-Pacific flight, his plane crashes. He is stranded on an island, a deserted island, for 4 years, and he builds a raft. He gets rescued, and he comes home. And I guess, in a nutshell, those are the broad strokes of the plot. Obviously, there's an emotional layer. There's many different layers that we can discuss, should my co-host be willing. I am interested to hear... I know Connor chose, but I'm interested to hear from Tony. I feel like Tony doesn't necessarily go first very often, and I just want to hear kind of off the cuff what Tony thought of this film. Is he going to lambaste the film? Is he going to give it its due credit, or something in between? Let's hear it, Tony.
Thank you, Kirk. And no, I will not give this movie its due. I refuse. I can see how great it is, and I refuse to admit it on camera. No. I don't know. So yeah, I'd never seen this movie. I was, of course, familiar with it, and Tom Hanks yelling Wilson. I know it's just one of those movies that, came out in 2000. I think, like Kirk said last time, I think everybody who was of movie watching age at the time pretty much saw it. My parents certainly saw it. I think we have the VHS somewhere. And just the poster images seared into my memory from seeing it at video stores, and I've seen the poster a million times. And yet the movie itself has never been one that I've really been recommended. I think it's a movie everyone kind of assumes you've seen, and it's not a movie that anyone I've never seen it cited as a classic of the era or anything. I don't mean that as a diss. I've just never encountered that. I don't think it's considered a canonical film or anything like that. And it was nominated for 2 Oscars. It didn't win any Oscars or whatever. So it was just sort of almost like a time capsule, or it's a kind of this piece of turn of the millennium, Y2K nostalgia or whatever. But it wasn't a movie that was necessarily on my radar in terms of that I was planning on really seeing until Kirk nominated it. But I think it's always worthwhile to like revisit a movie that was kind of popular in its time and say, what does this say about the time in which it was made? Why was this movie so popular, etc. I don't know. Like, I liked the movie in general. I did. I enjoyed it. I think that, it's a 2.5 hour movie. And I think I didn't realize it was that long. And when I saw there was 2.5 hours, I was just like, oh, like, really? Like, is this going to be? But like, I think the movie does a very good job of making you not feel its runtime. It's very like watchable and entertaining moment to moment, especially considering the fact that, not like all the movie, but like a good like 2/3 of it ish is just Tom Hanks on an island. Like a very solid chunk of the movie is just him by himself on an island, no other characters unless you count the famous volleyball Wilson. And that is quite a feat in itself, that a movie can be entertaining with just one actor in just one location. And I think the fact that the movie was as big of a success as it was with those elements is a testament to how skillfully Zemeckis is able to pull this off in terms of creating little scenes, little set pieces, a scene where he's, trying to make fire, a scene where he's trying to get water. There's a bunch of just little scenes where he has like a specific goal to accomplish. And the movie does a very good job of getting us to empathize with this character and kind of feel along with this character and become very invested in his just like basic survival. I want to definitely give props to Tom Hanks for his performance in this movie. I think Tom Hanks is someone who like we kind of take for granted sometimes. Like for us, like, cinephile types or people who watch a lot of movies, and Tom Hanks is such like a basic, it's like saying you like oatmeal or something. But like, movies like this remind you that like why Tom Hanks is such a big star, why Tom Hanks is as huge as he is. He has this incredible, like transparent, like empathetic face where his emotions are just so visibly apparent. It's almost like a Jimmy Stewart. He's very like naked and raw. He's just incredibly like captivating in this movie when he's anxious, when he's angry, when he's despairing. He just really sells all those emotions. And even just like when he's, on the plane back home and he's just kind of staring into space. I think it's legitimately like a great performance. It's like, I think movies like this, the performances tend to get praised regardless because we see the actor like, oh, he's got a big beard, or oh, he's just by himself on an island. His performance must be good, because if the performance isn't good, then the movie would be bad, and the movie's not bad. But I think he's legitimately like very good in this movie, and he definitely like rises to the occasion of this fairly challenging role to like carry the movie all on himself. So I'll give the movie props for that. The movie also reminded me of Titanic at points in terms of how unexpectedly visceral it was. I think the plane crash sequence is very effective disaster action movie kind of filmmaking, in the same way that obviously on a much smaller scale, but in a similar way that Titanic is in its second half. Very intense, very like almost nauseating in terms of watching and just seeing the flood of the water and seeing the approaching ocean as the plane is sinking. That's all great. The moment where he finds the corpse of the pilot, very like, kind of like disturbing and kind of like unsettling moment. When we see him get injured at various points in the movie, there are various points in the movie where I was like wincing or just like, ooh, like, ow, which is more than I was kind of expecting. So I give the movie credit for all of that. However, I think that the movie ultimately is a little bit too sentimental for my taste. I do like that his, long-term relationship, that his girlfriend who was going to propose to, that she does end up not waiting for him. I do like that about the movie. I like that the movie ends on that kind of bittersweet note, and then he has to kind of move on. I liked that. I did not like the scene where she runs out in the rain and professes her love to him, and they kiss in the rain as the score swells. That was like, that was like way too much. It was, I didn't care for that at all. And I also felt that in terms of the depiction of his time on the island, I really wish the movie had emphasized a little more, one, the despair, just the pure bleakness of that situation. At the end of the movie, he tells us that he had attempted suicide. And it's this like big shocking moment, like, oh my God, he attempted suicide. And I'm like, I mean, who wouldn't in that situation? I mean, come on, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's presented as this like horrible thing, but like, I wish we had seen that scene. I wish we had seen him attempt suicide. I wish we had seen the depths of despair this man can sink to in this horrible situation. And also just the boredom. That's not to say we needed like 10-minute sequences of him staring at nothing, but like I feel like that's an element of that experience that's very obvious that the movie didn't even really address. How did this man keep his mind occupied other than talking to Wilson? So there were parts of this movie that I wish had been done just a little bit differently or calibrated a little bit differently, and maybe it had emphasized different things. But in general, I think it's a very well done, very entertaining movie. And it's held together by a great Tom Hanks performance. So I was positive on the whole, despite my reservations.
Well, there you go, folks. Tony advocating for a 4-hour runtime. Also he wished Tom Hanks had slapped Helen Hunt in the face, and he wished Wilson was replaced by Daniel Radcliffe's corpse because, we all know how much he loves Swiss Army Man. Just kidding, Tony. Thank you for your thoughts. In all seriousness, many of my thoughts align with yours, almost eerily so. But I'll save those for later. And I do want to go with Anthony now. I want to hear Anthony's perspective from the blockbuster age up until now, when he probably watched it on Blockbuster Plus streaming service. Let's hear it, Anthony.
Yes. I think it's got to be said, if we're going back to the year 2000 and thinking about the kind of cultural impact the movie had at the time, I remember so many different commercials, so many different parodies. I think the famous FedEx commercial where it was a cell phone, a satellite cell phone, all along, which seemed to trick many people into thinking that they had seen the movie, even if they hadn't. And other commercials that lampooned it, like where the woman opened the box he saved to the end and found like something ridiculous and silly and kind of completely unimportant, just to the Tom Hanks caricature dismay. But the other side about that I want to bring up is, what Tony was saying about Tom Hanks being taken for granted. One thing watching it this time in running through my head was this idea of, it's kind of fascinating to think of Tom Hanks leading a $400 million grossing movie at a time when he's still not politicized. It's very interesting to me to think about the way, like, over the last couple of years, he's become kind of a figure of love for one group and a figure of hate for kind of another, or a figure in the source of conspiracies. And whether, if this was released on like a Netflix or something today, whether people could kind of turn that moment off just to think of Tom Hanks as delivering a sort of solid performance, as Tony said. Now, when it comes to the actual movie itself, I got to say, I don't necessarily think it's great. I don't necessarily even know if it's good. It's certainly not bad. It just kind of falls sort of like blankly in between these two things. And I want to say, well, before I forget, I think other than the Coen brothers, and I don't know who else, maybe Christopher Nolan, this is our second Robert Zemeckis film. We did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I would not have expected his name to be, someone we covered twice before some others. So I just wanted to say that. But in terms of the movie itself, I just don't know if there's like something deeper to it, even if it wants to, because when I watched this movie this time, it's like, I feel like Robert Zemeckis's mind is really with the second half of the movie, but his heart seems so devoted to the first 2/3 when he's stuck on the island. And my reasoning for that is, there's this whole thing towards the end when he comes back and he's trying to readapt himself. And the film wants to kind of pinpoint the kind of like, ridiculousness of bureaucracy or paperwork or current system, how hard it is to bring a man back from the dead. I think someone tells him at one point. The guy's name is Chuck Noland, for crying out loud. This idea that he's sort of without a place. And yet, to me, that's actually a much more interesting idea. Like, why not just run with that for an hour and a half? But also the first part of the movie when he's stuck on the island, to me, is kind of just a Robinson Crusoe update without really anything too deep or, superficially interesting beyond these kind of super quick tasks that are often carried out. And to watch a man go from someone who's kind of saddled with, at the contemporary sort of ways of living, he's a little bit more pudgy, he's a little bit more kind of leisurely, I suppose, in some way about his working life, to see him transform into kind of, something of use on this kind of empty island, reeks of a kind of interesting colonial kind of lair, that just kind of washes away when he gets away. And I don't really know what to do more beyond that, other than to think about how FedEx is leaving its trash and pollution all across the world as it carries these packages from one end to the other. And when I think about it that way, there's, some fun stuff if I want to be nitpicky academic like. But by the time I get to the end of the movie, I think Tony's right. Sentimentality doesn't necessarily add anything for me. And I don't even necessarily think Robert Zemeckis believes in it fully by the end of the movie. I don't necessarily think he's convinced by some of the decisions at the end. And I don't necessarily feel convinced by what the movie wants to do from start to the end in delivering us the story of a man who's changed by an island. But maybe I'll just leave it for there so I don't take up too much time.
Thank you, Anthony. See, I disagree with you. I think Zemeckis had his heart in it throughout. I think he got lost in the weeds in the middle, but towards the end, we don't hear the original theme for this film until at least the 90-minute mark. I don't know, if not later. Like when he finally sails, he gets out onto the open ocean. So I don't know. And I think that's kind of the emotional linchpin. Like that's kind of what brings the average viewer into a moment of introspection, I guess. Whereas throughout kind of the middle third, we're just focused day to day, right? We're focused on his survival. But fair enough, fair play, Anthony. I can see we're all jaded bastards here, and we're gonna go to Connor now, who's gonna just the coup d'etat. Here we go, coup de grace. I mean, and give it to me straight, Connor. You're at the switch in the jailhouse. I'm strapped to the bed. I got the IV in my arm, the 3 vials. It's 2:22 a.m. We got the reporters.
Don't tempt me with a good time, Kirk. Man, I'm liking this scenario. Tell me more.
And I just had my last meal. It was crab. And my last words are, I'll be back. I'll be back soon. There we go.
Okay.
So go ahead, Connor.
All right. I'm
flip
ready,
the
Kirk.
switch.
Be
the executioner.
I'll flip it. Okay. I have to say, I myself felt like a castaway watching this movie. I've thought of that line like an hour ago by now. It doesn't sound as cool as I thought it would. By that I mean, okay, how can I feel so estranged from the great American movie-going public, which voted with their wallets and loved this movie? It is such a touchstone. Wilson is such a famous thing. I felt like obviously I hadn't seen it. I mean, there was so much that I didn't know about the movie. But it's such a touchstone. Like we hear about this movie all the time, and I do not for the life of me understand why. Like, what is it about this movie that spoke to so many people? I think I can agree. I can understand where Tony is coming from on the fact that it's inoffensive and it's good and it's well done and it's well written and Tom Hanks is a good actor and yes, but I don't think that should be enough to capture the affections of such a large audience. And for me, I found myself kind of just I guess the inoffensiveness of it was part of the problem. And again, that's because I'm a jaded bastard, as Kirk said, and it's true. What did I need to see? What did I need? I needed Tom Hanks to be an evil man. I needed him to I needed to see all kinds of details of his life on the island that we didn't get to see. That we got to see a lot, to be honest. I needed there to be more tragedy when he comes back. I needed there to be more, I don't know what. So I admit that maybe it is pure jadedness. Whereas for someone who doesn't go to a lot of movies, they go to this movie, they find themselves along for the ride. I totally can see that, right? That in this case is I need more novelty to it. But honestly, I did still feel even with that, even with the premise being what it was, there were a lot of just missed opportunities. Okay, for instance, the middle, as we've all said, I think it feels a little bit too long in the middle, in the castaway portion, because it's not even the most important part of the movie, in a way, right? I think they could have spent less time doing that, or if you had spent more time, I think simply having an interior monologue, right? We've seen with okay, the Robinson Crusoe story, right? Often these desert island stories have a first person narrator saying okay, well, on this day I did this and I had this thought, and we could get more into his head, whereas we're kind of reliant on the fact that he creates Wilson, right? And then he says his thoughts aloud even before he creates Wilson. It's kind of just like, it seemed kind of pointless to me that they didn't just have like, a frame narrative or something where he's like writing down what he experienced on the island or something like that. But and then, I thought the part that was, had the most potential for drama was the end when he comes back. And yeah, like he finds that, he's basically been mourned and buried, right? And everyone has moved on, including his girlfriend. Now that is, of course, very interesting, but like I think it totally pulled the punch with like the fact that she basically confesses that she still loves him, and basically will like run away with him, and then he says like, no, you can't. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, he's the one who says like, oh no, like actually I want you to be with your like nuclear family, like that's better for you, I guess. Like, even when she didn't even like say that. Anyway, Kirk will elucidate this for me. But I just thought that was kind of lame to me. I didn't really get it. And it ends with this like thing of just like the message of just like, we just have to hang on. We just have to hang on in life, right? Like, we can face these challenges. We just have to hang on and survive. But like, I don't know, like, is that all we need to do? Yeah.
Connor,
Anyway,
did you want it to end with him going back to the island and actually hanging himself? Would that have
that would have been very cool. Yes, that would have been awesome. Going back all the way.
Can you imagine the
finds
movie
a sturdier
too?
tree.
Can you imagine the movie too, where she like just runs off with him, and the next 30 minutes are about them like fleeing her family? She just built.
She would abandon her child for sure.
Yeah,
they would completely ruin the child and
the surviving thing. Not that I think it's good to die. I'm not saying that. Okay, I'm just saying that it's like, I don't know, like as a message, like there should have been some key to how he made it through that. I survived for this or for that, or I don't know. That's what I mean. But anyway, you have the floor, Kirk.
All right. Well, let's bring it in here. I'm feeling like a substitute teacher right now on the last day of class with all these smart Alex. Don't really understand the movie. I just put on the roll-in TV. They're making paper airplanes and they're smoking their jewels, making me feel like shit. Well, guess what, buddy? My life is shit. You can't make me feel any worse. Oh man, no. Went about as well as I could expect, to be honest, between the three of you. Tony was the kindest, though perhaps he just wasn't as candid as the others. I feel like that might be true. If he went last, he would be a little more negative. One thing I was thinking of when Connor's like a frame narrative, they should have like gone the Scorsese route and like had Tom Hanks do like a greaseball accent.
Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be an island man.
I prefer him with the greaseball accent, I have to say. Have you seen Catch Me If You Can? Great accent. Great accents. He's capable.
Hand ready. No, so he'd be like, FedEx, we deliver 27,000 packages a day. I bet you're wondering how I got on this island. Well, let me tell you. And then it starts playing some fucking Rolling Stones and somebody's head's blown off. But all right. So points well taken, I guess, or not so well taken by me, perhaps. Yeah, I actually, this isn't a movie like Titanic where Titanic I'm just all in, right? Like I'm going down with the ship. This movie, I might jump and go back to the island after there's some big waves and I get smashed on the reef. So yeah, see the thing I think that's so special about this film is its place in time, like Tony alluded to, the year 2000, right? We look at the year 2000 and we see that the first season of Survivor came out earlier that year. And that is a critical correlation with this film. Survivor was a monolithic cultural phenomenon. It was appointment TV. For a while, there was like Susan was from Wisconsin. She took fourth place in Survivor. She was a truck driver. She was famous, okay? Like she was legitimately famous, more famous than Snooki. She took fourth place. So Survivor was amazing, you know, for a populace that was like starved for the sense of reality, right? This sense of visceral connection to something that felt foreign, but also primal, perhaps, threatening, exotic. These themes, I think, drew people in. Now, of course, the movie was made before Survivor became such a hit, but it kind of gives some perspective as to why this film did so well commercially. Also, it came out on Christmas, I think. I do myself remember seeing this. I was 10 years old. I saw it with my extended family, and I remember my aunt on the way out, who's, you know, she doesn't write for Sight and Sound, but you know, she was saying something to the effect of, "Oh, it's castaway, like cast away. It's two words as opposed to like a castaway, a shipwreck castaway. It's like somebody who's like actively been cast away, like thrown away." And so that was like the extent of her critical analysis in that at that point. And like, I think that's special when a movie can kind of engage somebody who goes to the movies to relax, right? To have fun, to escape their lives for 2 hours. Like that's ultimately why movies started. And that's what continues to buttress the industry. It's not these A24 films that we all love, you know, that are pushing the art forward. I think, you know, we don't get these. We were talking about movie theaters a couple of weeks ago. Like these theaters don't exist without these Marvel films, as much as I hate them, right? So I think this enjoyed such cultural significance because of Survivor, because of the, you know, the turn of the millennia, the turn of the century. You know, I was looking at AOL subscriber numbers, and AOL actually between 1999 and 2000, they went up, I think, 8 million subscribers. So they like, it was like 15 to 23. So they basically went up by 150%, right? Which is significant. Like AOL was coming into its own. And I think the reason I bring that up is because this film ultimately, thematically speaking, is about control, and it's about time. Time it's very heavy-handed, right? Like the whole FedEx, like he's a FedEx employee, right? He's not like a historian or somebody, I don't know. And I think getting back to the themes of like, specifically the theme of control, right? When you're on a desert island, you lose control. And this is an American populace who is struggling to cope with the idea that so much is now at their fingertips, right? That they can dial in to this portal that will give them all the answers and will connect them to their great aunt in Missouri through email and their sister in Kentucky. And it's a little scary because usually it takes, you know, 10 days via post. And now I can email Auntie Grace for her mashed potato recipe at 5:50 in the morning. And it's kind of terrifying, right? I think this is where we start to well, it might have happened earlier, but like from a Cartesian sense, like this is where we start to kind of lose the thread on like history and how we can even reckon with all the technology that's, you know, around us and infused within our lives. And so this movie, a movie about a man stuck on a fucking island, I think presented such an opportunity. Especially, it's not just any man, right? It's not Josh Duhamel. Like it's Tom Hanks. Okay, we're going to this island with our best buddy. We've seen him in The Green Mile. We saw him. He had another big one earlier. I mean, he had plenty of big
Forrest Gump is that what?
No, but I mean, like he was on a 3-year hot streak. I think he got nominated like 2 or 3 years in a row.
Philadelphia before that, and then, I don't know what is it, that year. That was like
Green
10
Mile.
years before that. Never mind.
But yeah, so he had enjoyed a great deal of success, obviously throughout his career, but in the years preceding. And Yeah, I just think sometimes, ultimately this is a movie that was responsive to the needs of the public, either intentionally or, just, I guess, accidentally. It's really something to behold, and I think there is some significance. So I guess I'll throw it to you guys with the idea that, with the question of, does a movie that held such cultural significance, should it be relegated to obscurity if we don't find the critical innards to be something that we would necessarily praise, right? It's kind of, it feels formulaic. I agree. There are times like I really could have done without the whales. While he's sailing along, like the CGI whale with that eye, looks straight out of Grand Theft Auto 3. So I'm just curious, anybody wants to jump in? I'm not going to really kind of throw questions like I do at like each one of you, but just in general, we could talk about the idea of a movie that might not hit as hard, but it's almost like important historically, or sociologically speaking. I'm just curious how anybody would respond to that.
Well, I think you're onto something, Kirk, in terms of the idea of watching the film as a cultural artifact or a cultural reflection, maybe more seriously than we've done certain others, at least in this sort of venue. Not only is it, I had to look this up, it's the third highest grossing movie of that year, 2000. It's behind Mission Impossible 2 and Gladiator, which is kind of fascinating to think about because, we're a couple years earlier or prior to the Marvel takeover beginning and the superhero takeover beginning with Spider-Man. We're before George Bush. We're before 9/11, of course. We're the last holiday season before it, if I have that right. And we're in this kind of period of the dot-com bubble where it's starting to slowly go down. And it kind of feels so simplistic, but I could only imagine, I'm sure you're right. We're coming out of also the Y2K fears. We're coming out of fears about technology running rampant. The X-Files is still big. A couple years before that, sci-fi movies about corporations are huge. The other big movie this year that's a cultural touchdown for this reason is Erin Brockovich, which is, of course, the idea of corporate life just running amok and having the little man trying to take it down. And so I guess in some ways, Castaway is a reflection of, getting away from all that. And, maybe Tom Hanks, I think it's Saving Private Ryan is maybe what you're thinking of. Tom Hanks is kind of a leading, not necessarily Brad Pitt, but like a likable, commonly attractive enough guy as the person you go to the island with and you see live out part of that fantasy is certainly something maybe there, or maybe was in the culture's kind of subconscious. But at the same time, right, what does the movie kind of endorse if you read it that way? It endorses, well, getting away from society and culture is not a good idea at all. Look what happens when you get away from it. You lose the love of your life to another nuclear family, even if she still loves you. Society thinks you're dead. You don't really have a place. And what you're left with is a bunch of paperwork to get you back into reality. So maybe the idea of the island is better to escape to and to live on rather than to be a permanent sort of sanctuary. But I don't know. And I'm just throwing out ideas, kind of spitting off the top of my head.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of half baked, but I think there is something there, like the idea that ultimately what did him in was the length of time he was on the island. It wasn't necessarily his exposure to the island, I don't think, or loneliness. Like he seemed really well adapted, which I think was another problem. Like he's on the plane flying home. And he's like, "I'm so sorry your wife died and I wasn't there." Like he should be like saying like goo goo gaga.
He should
like,
be screaming at the walls and shitting himself.
Yes, that's that's like kind of the 2023 adaptation, right? Like or a remake. That's what we would see. So anyways, Connor and Tony, do you have any thoughts as well?
I was just gonna say, so like, just another thing that occurs to me, like in terms of cultural reading, it's like so weird to me. It's so interesting, right? How the movie starts, right? Where he's in Russia. The idea is like it sort of is like FedEx colonialism. Like they're bringing FedEx to Russia, right? Which is like the super inefficient, system, and he's kind of going to kind of clean it up. There's something very, very sinister about it to me at first when I was watching it. I mean, I think obviously the movie is like kind of trying to like challenge it? Like we get that he's kind of like he's rigid in his view of time, and like does it get better when he's on the island? Like no, like and that's the weird thing about it is usually like these desert island stories are like fun. You know, the idea is that like you go to the desert island and you're in this kind of like state of nature. It's like scary at first, but then you realize it's like, oh, you can just live your own life, and it's kind of a fantasy of like total autonomy and power, right? And of course, he doesn't have that. He's out of control, which is a good point, as you in fact would be, right, in like this kind of situation. But like, I don't know how that comes back. And I just think again, just the point of like why this spoke to people. Like it's got to be like the Wilson thing, right? Like why is that? That's the thing we know. But like in the movie, it's like nothing. It's like not particularly significant at all to me. But like what is it about the Wilson thing that people like when he says Wilson, does that just speak to people, like this idea of like having this kind of embarrassing thing, like having this embarrassing kind of imaginary friend and like losing it and like actually being sad about it? I don't know, like what is it about, you know, that moment that like spoke to people? I don't know.
I think that's it. Yeah, Tony. I mean, we got a man talking to a volleyball alongside with like these hyper masculine representations, like you said, Tom Cruise, Russell Crowe. I think there's something zany, something vulnerable, something that feels, I guess, threatening, but at the same time real about that level of, you know, kind of like that level of effeminate affectation, right? And maybe it's not even a gendered thing, but I'm just thinking through the lens of somebody who like drinks Mountain Dew, plays a Monopoly, McDonald's sandwich game, goes to Blockbuster every Friday night, really loved Gosford Park or whatever fucking movie they just saw. Anyways, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just describing yourself, Kirk. I know. No, I think it is kind of what you said. I wouldn't necessarily put it in gender terms, but it's sort of like, again, it's Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks, who is not only we love as a hero because he's Tom Hanks, he brings that to the movie, right? He can do no wrong. And we've also seen, even within the movie, him doing all these incredible feats that are frankly probably a little unrealistic, you know, that he's building this raft and everything. And he has this moment of raw vulnerability, which he plays very like sincerely and very like painfully, crying like Wilson, you know, his friend. I think that is like a thing that probably resonated with people emotionally, because who doesn't like talk to themselves sometimes, right? Or I don't know, maybe I'm outing myself here, someone who talks to himself. Maybe not everyone does it, but I like to think most people do it from time to time when they're by themselves. But it's not something it's embarrassing. It's not something we really ever acknowledge or talk about. So you see this person, this movie star, Tom Hanks, and a person who's in this survival situation, who is their integrity, their, I guess, to give acknowledge Kirk's point, his masculinity, his proficiency, his competence is not in question at all, but he still has this, you know, this painfully human thing of like needing that connection, even if it's to like an inanimate object, right? So I can see why that would resonate with people emotionally. And it could be that simple. It could be that like very simple idea is this indelible kind of image, you know, because I can't really think of another movie where we've seen that happen in that way, right? So I can see why the movie made an impression on people, for that moment made an impression on people. But I think, I'm glad you pointed out Survivor, because I was literally, as you were talking, like, wait a minute, when did Survivor start? But yeah, and I think it is something to do with technology. You know, being in, you know, the middle of history as they were at this time, I think the popularity of both things speaks to this idea, maybe this anxiety on the part of a lot of people of like, we're all very comfortable and very pampered with all this technology and all these conveniences. This bounty that if you live in the United States, certainly, I mean, not everywhere in the United States, you know, I have to kind of qualify it a little bit, but assuming you're like a middle class person in the United States at this time in history, you have a standard of living beyond most people in the world. Certainly when you take it on a historical level, like, are you kidding me? Like, no comparison. All this technology that is essentially like, you know, magic, you know, no one can explain how this works. Can you explain how the internet works? I can't. I don't pretend I do. For all intents and purposes, to me, it is like magic, you know. And that's how most technology is, right? For most people, right? And I think with that comes some real insecurity because we're aware of how reliant we are on all of these things to just live our lives, not just to survive, but to be, happy in quotes, right? To feel any, and we aren't even happy. We aren't even happy when we're given like these magical things that would have like blown the minds of someone from even like 50 years ago. Not like people within living memory would not be able to believe some of this shit, right? So it's like, wow, are we even people anymore? Are we in touch with our base like humanity? If I were to start from nothing, if I were to start from just the soil, would I be able to even exist, let alone be happy, right? Because being happy, which is the great concern of all these like end of history movies, American Beauty, The Matrix, Fight Club, or whatever, a lot of them are about just malaise, existential malaise, and sort of like, am I happy? Am I satisfied with my life or whatever? In this movie, the protagonist is thrown into a situation where that question is almost moot. You're way lower on Maslow's hierarchy. You don't have having to worry about whether you're satisfied and fulfilled and actualized is a tremendously privileged concern because most people throughout most of human existence, all they've had to worry about is like having food to eat and making sure their children don't get eaten by bears or murdered, right? That's what most people through most of time have had to worry about. So as we go up this pyramid, we have this malaise of, well, why aren't we happy? Why aren't we actualized? What is this greater thing we're still yearning for? And also a sense of self-loathing that we would have that anxiety when the world is at our oyster, the world is at our fingertips, and we have every opportunity and every privilege at our, as I said, at our fingertips. So I think that's kind of what the movie kind of speaks to, is that idea of like, if I were taken back to zero, if I were taken back to that complete, like the complete starting point, would I be able to live? And I think that, certainly I watched the movie. I'm like, I would not be able to, I wouldn't make it 4 years on that island. I mean, I don't kid myself. I mean, I would be lucky to make it a week. I just don't think I'd be able to do it. But I think it's an idea that it's an aspirational thing. And I think people like to imagine, and Survivor's the same way. People like to imagine that if they were placed in that environment, that they would be able to survive and in fact thrive. So I think that's kind of, those are the things that are kind of like, not necessarily like the movie is about in an intentional way, but I think those are the ideas. That's the conversation the movie's having with its audience, and that those are the ideas in the kind of the cultural ether that helped make this movie exist at this particular time. Because this movie really could have been made at any time, right? I mean, a man being trapped on an island, they could have made that movie in 1922, right? There's no reason they couldn't make it. It's like one of the oldest stories there is. So, but there's a reason this movie came out at this time and why it became so popular at this time.
Well said, Tony. Actually, very well said. I truly appreciate your points. Any responses to Tony's idea of kind of reducing ourselves to our baser needs and instincts? I think, and I'll let you respond, Connor, Anthony, if you do have any responses. But I think for me, and this is a through line that I noticed for throughout this discussion, is the idea that Zemeckis really didn't commit to. He wanted to make an enjoyable movie, right? Like he wants this to be audience friendly. It's maybe like that's exemplified in by the fact that Wilson feels more like a device to actually have more dialogue in the film than a display of the true insanity that one would, kind of fall into due to this kind of forced isolation. So there's like less poignancy than there really should be with a general plot of this ilk. And that's what I'm kind of annoyed by. Just kind of this placation, right? And really, really not committing. And at the end, I think he didn't commit fully, like you said, Connor, with some of the decisions in the end, even if technically she did ask to get out of the car first. I will say that. She did say his name, and then he said, "You have to go home." And so, but it is like, yeah, she's running in the rain. Anthony, I know you said that too. But anyways, Connor, Anthony, anywhere you want to take this?
Yeah.
Any thoughts you want to respond to?
Yeah, one just quick thing. I totally agree with what you just said, Kirk, and I really agree with how Tony summed up the kind of middle of history, as he calls it, sort of relationship to the film. I will pull on one thing though, very typical Anthony move. I will say maybe there is more of a gender play or reading here than we were giving credit for. And it comes to mind because of Connor bringing up the kind of fun of the desert island stories that usually happens. It strikes me, in the 80s, for instance, you had the Blue Lagoon, the Brooke Shields. I can't remember the male actor's name, but this is kind of an extremely sexless film, not just because he's the only guy on the island, but usually when these stories happen, they love to kind of throw an Adam and Eve type scenario. But instead, we get something a bit more common, I think, that has to happen in the late 90s, early 2000s, which is a guy going back to an idealized version of the man at the same time, even if that man is dirtied, even if he's frustrated and lonely. It's a guy who's doing what is the most prototypical male fantasy, surviving on nothing but his will against nature. And what happens when he gets back? That survival instinct is no longer valued. Why? Because we're cuddled with our technology, our home, our nuclear families, and we're not even able to appreciate it and get back to it. And I feel like that kind of runs underneath this weird kind of surface that Zemeckis doesn't know what to do with. And it ties into kind of a similar frustration in the male experience that happens at this period, a little bit, I would say. And I just am fascinated. Not that, every desert island story is about a man or woman or about sexually interested people, because that's what Lost becomes just a few years later, but how much that element seems removed from the movie. Anyway.
So is Tom Hanks' character red pilled in the first third of the movie? Is that what we're saying? Is Andrew Tate going to show up on the island? No, it's an interesting thought, right? There is some wish fulfillment here, perhaps, even if it is a disaster scenario. Especially when he's like, I have created, fire, like very, very explicitly, he's doing that, and we're allowed to celebrate with him in that sense. Connor, what do you think? I mean, we've kind of painted, a Pollock rather than by numbers here. We're a little dispersed, but perhaps that's for the best at times. Anything you'd like to respond to? Anything catching your ear?
I think we're getting to the meat of the crab here. I think we're onto something here, and it turns out there is a lot to say. I think again, okay, back to this idea. Yes, it's not a happy desert island story, right? Only triumph and kind of enjoyment that comes from that are the moments, as you guys just said, where he like conquers his environment, right? So like, there's these moments of like conquest of making the fire. That's like the only kind of happy moment we see. I feel, there's no other moments where like in other desert island stories, they occasionally like enjoy the nice weather and like, that kind of thing. Enjoy swimming, try to make their own fun in this like, simplified world. I think this movie does not believe that this is really a simplified world. It's a worse world than his normal life. Now what's interesting about that is I think again though, I think the contrast is not being made there so much because in fact the movie is making a kind of like an equivocation between the two. Because think about what we hear at the very end, the ending speech, like, he's saying, okay, I've learned that I have to take it one day at a time and I have to survive. And what he's referring to there is his own struggles with like now not having Kelly in his life, right? That how is he going to move on, right? And the idea is that, well, if he lived through that, through that desert island experience, right, then he can also survive like losing the love of his life, right? And that's something that I think there the movie is making a sort of an equivocation or equivalence between like our lives and the life of Tom Hanks on the island. I feel like it's trying to function as like a metaphor for our life, that we can like think about that and be kind of inspired by that. So I think that like that makes it seem a little bit less like it's trying to like establish the desert island as this really unique scenario. It's trying to say that it's somehow like metaphorical for all of our lives. And that's kind of telling if that's the case, because like, okay, we're kind of these lonely individuals that are kind of struggling in this, state of nature and barely scraping by. And like, we take credit for whatever little accomplishment we have, right? Like, and we're all like completely alone, I think it's not a completely accurate vision of the world, but somehow it's like, that is maybe the vision that it's kind of setting up. I don't know. And also, I thought of this: what if Tom Hanks is our Wilson? Okay, that's all I'll say.
Connor, that hit hard. That hit hard for a second. Yeah, I feel like there's so many theses that could be developed from this line of thinking, but very, very poignant thought. Anybody want to respond? Anybody care to respond to the general idea that perhaps we are deluding ourselves? We can never really know someone else. I don't know.
Well, that made me think of the very end of the movie. It's kind of an interesting moment where like he has the whole monologue about like moving on, and you never know what the tide's going to bring in the next day. And we have basically the ending of Dumb and Dumber happen in this movie, where like this extremely hot woman pulls up with like a cute dog in the back, and she's like, "Hey, Tom Hanks, I think you're really hot. I want to be your girlfriend." And he's like, "That's nice." And he waves and she drives away. So I was kind of wondering what that like what that was supposed to signify, you know, for the half of a person who hasn't seen this movie. Statistically, out of the number of people who are going to listen to this, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but basically, he encounters a woman on the road, and then she drives away, and he doesn't make any attempt to like ask her name or anything like that. And I think it's clearly like we're supposed to see her and kind of think like, oh, this could be a potential new love interest, right? And there's a version of this movie that ends with them, you know, getting coffee or something, or implying that something's going to happen. But it doesn't. It definitively does not. He watches her drive away, and he kind of watches for a while. Wait, what? Right? Kirk's giving me this look like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, he looks. He's at a crossroads. He's
a literal
he looks
crossroads.
the four cardinal directions, right? Like he can go to California, he can go south to Mexico, he can go east to Louisiana, or he can go into North Texas and see this woman, and he decides on that avenue. I think that's implied.
You think? Oh, so you think he's going to go like follow her, basically?
100,000%. That's the movie, yeah, and that's like the whole. That's how it ties in the package that he kept, right? Like it's
in Castaway too. You gotta keep watching.
Castaway 2, he gets back after a month, but she's already married a new guy.
It's an icon of hope, or an emblem of hope, the symbol on the FedEx box. The quick question though, before we wrap up, is this the most overbearing example of native advertisement in like a major motion picture? Like I can't really think of, you know, at least at that time, it's become, I don't know if it's become better or worse, more prevalent or less, but anybody want to comment on like just the fact that FedEx is like, yeah, I'll do this. Like they didn't make up some, you know what I mean? They could have made up like Ship and Go or something, or I don't know. It felt weird at the time. It still feels weird. Wilson, right? Wilson's a brand. I don't know. Something to think about. I don't think they had financial motivation per se, but at the same time, I wonder why they didn't fictionalize some of these references.
I think it was the money, Kirk. I think that was it. But no, I mean the idea of like your return to life ceremony, like sponsored by FedEx. There's something very like stomach turning about it. I guess he was their employee, but still, there's just something very off about it. But you know.
Yeah, well, but he did crash in one of their planes. You know, it's like, come work for FedEx, you can die. You know, 5 FedEx employees did die in the movie, or 4, I guess. Tony, you were about to say something?
No, I think that is sort of that is an angle we didn't really explore, is how like I almost cringe to use the word, but how like neoliberal the movie is, you know, how like capitalist the movie is, you know, like that very ideological, like Connor points out at the beginning in Russia, where is there was someone taking down a Lenin sign, or were they putting it up? I don't remember. They're literally taking down a sign of Lenin. And you have a scene where Tom Hanks is literally lecturing these Russians, like, you gotta work, you gotta have motivation, you gotta get on the clock, you gotta do this. And it's this weird thing, is it's like, that's not like, there's no other scene in the movie where he's really acting like that. Like, it's just like, it's like this, he's being very like bossy. I guess he is their boss, but it's just like sort of, it feels very like ideological. And then again, like the end of the movie where FedEx welcomes him back into human society and everything. It's like, yeah, there is something a little bit like, which also feels very like of its time. So we can add that to the thesis.
That's
Yeah,
kind of what I was saying at the beginning too, though. It's like there's something weird about all that, and there's like kind of the annoying part about the film is like there are no answers outside of the corporate world. And like in this period of like post-Soviet Union, still kind of emerging democracy of Russia, it's like, oh, the only answer is globalization, and we should accept it and follow it.
And also when they go outside and their FedEx truck can't move, they're like, it's stuck. It has a boot with the hammer and sickle on it. It's very, very on the nose. Did you not catch that?
Oh, I must have missed that part. Yeah, there's a lot to digest. I think, if I will indulge myself, I really appreciate the dynamic of the relationship, right? I think there's something about how time ties in and how he obviously we're meant to understand that he is on a schedule and he's neglecting to see that Kelly wants to, move forward, and he's not proposing, and like he doesn't get that chance. And maybe it would have played out differently, right? If they were engaged or if they were married. I think that question is meant to kind of creep into our heads. I don't think like I think his actions before the plane crash as well as the plane crash are both kind of causal elements in the fact that she didn't wait for him, quote unquote. But yeah, I don't know. Helen Hunt also, like, when I was growing up and, even a little bit later, I just want to marry her, right? Like, it's not like a sexual desire. It's not like I'm lusting for her. I just want to marry her. She's just she's so warm and inviting. She was in Twister. She's in a bunch of stuff around that time. Great actress of the 90s / early 2000s. Anyways, folks, let's move on to the voting. This was a spirited conversation. I appreciate everybody, jumping in. And yeah, we managed to get some good hits in, get some good blows in there. So I'm fully expecting 03, three no's, but that doesn't matter because the journey along the way, and tomorrow the sun will rise. The sun will rise tomorrow, Connor. So I just have to keep going. Even though I've lost this nomination, you never know what the tide will bring in. Anyways, let's go in the order we started. Tony.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think I was being soft. I think I did enjoy the movie. I would go so far as to say I enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. And it certainly has been fun to discuss. I think we've found more meat on the bone with this movie than we have with some more like artsy movies or whatever, so that's always fun. But, if I'm being honest with myself, can I really vote it in? Can I really say it's one of the 7 or 6 best of all time? For me, probably not, not quite, I enjoyed it, but I don't quite see anything in it that's like really transcendent or really special or really important. Although I think it is like my highest praise for it is that it's an interesting little time capsule and, a solid watch. So.
Yeah. And kind of like, it's just kind of disappeared, and maybe that's valid, but also it's kind of fun to unearth these things. I think that's part of the appeal of this podcast for everybody involved to a degree. Not that this has totally disappeared, but anyways, who is next? Anthony.
Yeah, I gotta say this movie's no Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So I'm sorry, Kirk. I gotta go no. In terms of like the movie being forgotten, I mean, looking back at like the top 10 films, the highest grossing films from 2000, yes, Castaway was number 3, but like how many people are still watching Dinosaur or The Perfect Storm? It's kind of an interesting thing to think you're still watching Dinosaur.
No, I watched The Perfect Storm like a month ago. I love that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Kirk's always proving me wrong, so
this is just Kirk's era, Anthony. This is like his the time.
Yeah.
I will get The Perfect Storm on this podcast eventually. I think it needs to be seen. Just the George Clooney performance alone, Mark Wahlberg, Anyway,
What was the name of that movie that Kirk made us watch, like with on the ship? Like I can't remember
Titanic?
it. No.
Sphere.
Sphere. There
The
you go.
Sphere.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll move
I
on.
have
Sorry,
a love
Kirk.
for the sea. I'm, the sea is so romantic and inviting and mystifying. All right, so Connor, ceremonial vote. Go ahead.
Okay, Kirk, it's a no, but when we do the podcast reviewing episodes of the 706, this one makes it in. Good episode. But yeah, I cannot give Castaway a yes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I'm not even too upset, but I'm glad we watched it. It's a fun episode, and we still have more to do because now we move on to the nomination phase. And let's see who went least recently. It wasn't Connor, obviously, so it's either Tony or
Anthony.
Yeah, I think I'm on a sort of a cold streak. I don't know if Roger Rabbit was my last film, but anyway, a little bit of a cold streak, not too bad.
I think we did Fright Night after that. I think Fright Night.
Okay.
You should go back to the Zemeckis well. Do Back to the Future. I'll pick it. I will. No, I don't do that. Anyways, Anthony, what's the order?
I think I'll do something different. I'll go first just to claim the decade. I'll make Connor go second and Tony third.
All right. And we are playing the Kirk provision of the nomination process where once a decade has been nominated, a movie has been nominated from that decade, it is now excluded. And that was the most clumsily said thing I've ever uttered. Anyways, Anthony, go ahead.
All right. So in the spirit of kind of thinking about movies that were kind of hits of their time and it kind of slowly withdrew from the kind of cultural consciousness, my film, I guess, not a huge runaway hit, sort of a sleeper hit. I think Tony has seen it with me. I believe we've all seen it though, but sort of an oddball, or maybe not oddball Anthony choice. It's from 2016. It's from Dan Trachtenberg and it's 10 Cloverfield Lane. And the reason for picking this, although I'll get more into a defense later on, is of course it's a sort of nightmare scenario in which a young woman on the run wakes up imprisoned by John Goodman in a kind of a survivalist type character. She's there with him and one other man, and she's kind of told that she can't go outside because something's happening. And the whole kind of movie sets up a situation of whether we're supposed to believe this story or not. And the movie doesn't always work, does fall apart at times, but at its heart is a kind of unique horror movie that I actually haven't seen since, but I think is worth recovering for the show. So anyway.
All right. And Anthony, I'll just say up front, the bulk of your work moving forward will be persuading me to believe that I do not have to see the original Cloverfield in order to pick this film because I have no interest in the original and I've never seen either. So that is your task. Who is next?
Connor, I think. Yeah.
It is me. I had to check my movie one more time. Okay, this is a little tough. I'm debating which to go with, what angle to take it. I think it's high time. It's been what, 30 years since we started this podcast. We did Spice World, our first episode, and my very first suggestion was, that's right, everybody, Josie and the Pussycats. Okay, from 2001, literally the year after. It is literally the same time period. We may have some similar things to say. Indeed, it is. Oh, you know what time. Well, you know what time it is. Okay. Josie and the Pussycats is a sort of cult sleeper hit. Obviously an adaptation of the cartoon that no one knows or remembers at all. But an interesting kind of meditation on, sort of corporate, sort of band creation, music, the music industry, essentially, with a great sense of humor that's kind of it's in the era of like Zoolander, et cetera. It's it is very funny, very over the top, Austin Powers-esque almost. And yeah, it's surprisingly good. I think it's like a very good one to revisit. And yeah, I think we could still be part of like this kind of this cult following that, it still has not like totally blown up, but we would all enjoy it.
Interesting. That is kind of my ballpark. That early 2000s. It's a critical period for me. Tony, go ahead.
All right, and Anthony, your movie came out in 2004, right? It was the year 2004. Now, I was mad because like I had a movie I was raring to pitch. I was hungry for it. Pitching it to Kirk. I was gonna serve it right up to him. So that's all right. That's fine.
This is
I'll
like the
save it.
first time I feel like this format really kind of hurts someone over.
But that's okay. I'll pitch it. I'll pitch it the next time I have the opportunity. I'll pitch the other movie I was thinking about this week. This is a movie that I'm assuming at least two of you have seen. I don't know. It is a horror movie. I think we got to do another horror movie. It's something of a horror classic. It's from the 90s. But it's a movie that I hear like people kind of shit on sometimes, or I feel like people kind of like roll their eyes at. And this is 1999's The Blair Witch Project, which in my view is one of the finest horror films ever made. I love this movie. I think it is the crowning achievement of the found footage subgenre that has never been topped. And I watched it again over Halloween with Sierra, and I was really taken aback by how chilling and how powerful I thought it was, how evocative I found it. I think it's something we got to do. I think we got to witch it up. We got to Blair it up.
I feel like I need to get frosted tips. I mean, we just watched a movie from 2000. We got one from 1999 and we got one from 2001. Anthony, you want to like adjust and nominate?
Yeah,
I don't know.
we're Gen Z here, man. We're bringing the 2000s back, everyone.
I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to complain. Let me give status. I would say the leader in the clubhouse right now is Blair Witch Project, because I haven't seen it and I really should have seen it by now. It's one of those, we all have those. I have more than most. And Josie and the Pussycats, yeah, I'm interested. Obviously, there's some, certainly it feels like in a similar vein of Spice World to an extent, even though that was a real band. And yeah, I'm curious. And then Anthony, 10 Cloverfield Lane. I feel like you have the most work to do, but that doesn't mean I've made up my mind. I'm a John Goodman fan. Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more of why you chose that and what it's got going for it over the others. But let's hear.
All right. Well, first, you don't have to watch the original Cloverfield, but you do have to watch the spiritual successor first, Cloverfield Paradox, to understand this movie. So I'm asking for a lot of work. No, this is the type of thing that I know totally annoys you, Kirk, but they called it 10 Cloverfield Lane to literally cash in on the Cloverfield franchise, or to make it a franchise at the time. They are really not connected beyond a kind of mere anecdote within the film. Now, discarded from that universe, it's kind of its own unique project. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is kind of the other co-star in addition to John Goodman. And I got to say, one kind of unique fact about this movie that often goes under-recognized: Damien Chazelle wrote the screenplay. Damien Chazelle of La La Land days, not Babylon days, La La Land days. So, no, I think The Blair Witch Project is a great horror movie. I actually really like it, and I watched the remake not too long ago and just felt utterly disgusted and went back to the original. I think there's a lot to it. I think it is one of the best found footage movies ever made. I'd be interested in watching it, and I think it's worth doing one day. But one day. I think Josie and the Pussycats, we all love Parker Posey and Rachel A. Cook, but I feel like maybe that's a 100th episode type discussion, not necessarily a 93, 93rd. I think 10 Cloverfield Lane really scratches the itches of both. Not too campy, a little bit of horror, some sci-fi there. We haven't done a sci-fi one in a while. And I think it is much more of a kind of psychological thriller, and we haven't really done that in a kind of heartbeat. So, 10 Cloverfield Lane. That'd be my argument.
Well, Anthony's holding back with making his arguments because he should remember this accolade of 10 Cloverfield Lane, that it was my number one of 2016 in our best of episode. And I freaking love that movie. To make Anthony's case for him, I would say it's like like a Hitchcock film for the modern day, something like that. Mary Elizabeth Winstead is amazing in it. She's inspiring, captivating. John Goodman, what can I say? Anyway, I love that movie. I truly do love it. Josie and the Pussycats. I'm not sure what else to say about it. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun with it, and it's gonna be an episode where we can have a lot to say, both in trying to have like themes we can talk about, but also like just funny things that happen in the movie and moments and characters and people like Seth Green, appears in the movie. Like talking about Seth Green, like wouldn't that be great? It's like kind of revisit Seth Green. And as for Blair Witch Project, I've never seen it, but it is not Halloween. I know Tony's a bit of a stickler for that sort of thing. So I say let's save it for Halloween. But I'm sure it's great, but it's no 10 Cloverfield Lane or Josie and the Pussycats.
Tony. I mean, Tony called that one movie we saw, Riders of Justice, a Christmas movie because there was like
I said it was Christmas adjacent, my friend, and it
was extremely
it
Christmas.
Absolutely is. So
no, it was not adjacent.
I have no crow to eat.
It was a Christmas bullseye.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I remember. Never mind. Tony, go ahead.
This is a podcast. It's all recorded. You can go back and check the tapes.
I will. I'll check the tapes. Tony,
okay, all right.
You got to sell me on Blair Witch Project.
Sure. So the fact that two of you have not seen it to me is like, we got to watch this one. Like I'm like, I mean, you're the judge. You're gonna pick whatever you're gonna pick. But if I were the judge, that would excite me very much if two of the three hadn't seen it. Because it is a classic. It is like a classic horror movie. It's an iconic film. It's, in the same way that Castaway was like a big splash. This movie was a big splash. This movie was a huge, triumph of guerrilla marketing. And in terms of independent film getting major distribution and becoming a legitimate like blockbuster, okay, maybe not, not like a number one film of the year or anything, but like a real phenomenon and kind of an early example of virality where the internet was used as part of the marketing. There was a website, there was like all this fake stuff set up. People thought the movie was real. People really thought the movie was real in 1999, right? So it's this really unique kind of moment culturally that will never be replicated. We'll never have another movie like the Blair Witch Project emerge in the way that it did and go mainstream in the way that it did. I also think that it's a movie that really transcends that. It's one thing to like go back and watch a movie like that and say like, okay, that's cute. I can see why at this time it got, whatever. But I think it taps into like something very powerful. Periodically you'll hear people ask like, like what are movies that like feel evil, and this is like kind of a feeling or a vibe I kind of chase, something that feels evil or unsettling. And this is one of those movies that I think like does that, where it's genuinely like unsettling and creepy and like you're watching something like a transmission from some sort of evil place. I think the feeling of dread is very palpable in the movie, and I think the performances are great. I hear people complain about the performances sometimes. I think they're really good. I think there's just okay. I don't want to blow my load here. I don't want to. But I just want to do it. Plus, I was born in 1993. This is episode 93. If I'm not hosting it, that's a crying shame. I don't know if you hosted 90 or not. but still,
I didn't. So
well, I'm very sorry.
There goes that. Symmetry.
We'll fix that in post.
Okay. Oh man. So I have like each film has its own merit, right? So Tony's is the film I want to see the most. Okay. Connor's is probably the episode I want to do the most. Anthony's is kind of the movie I think I would be the most surprised by based on the collateral input from Connor and the fact that Anthony's nominating it, and he usually doesn't, he doesn't do like meme stuff, so it should be good. So this is just tough. This is tough. I don't know what to say. Screw you guys. Why'd you do this? I think we got to go Josie and the Pussycats. I think we got to do it.
No,
I don't know.
Shit. Oh my God.
I don't know. I just felt like Fright Night was close. I don't know. Maybe I just want to. Have we done many movies about the music industry? I don't know. Not really. So, let's
You
go
just
back
want
to
us to do vinyl. This is a setup for us to do the show vinyl.
Yeah, I'm gonna pitch the first
And
season.
maybe
First
you'll
season.
Yeah, I got to do more meme stuff.
you'll get your wish. That's
No, I'm sorry,
unprecedented.
Anthony. I'm actually if 10 Cloverfield Lane was like a romance, I would have picked it. But I feel like horror, at least from my perspective, we've hit horror pretty hard. So no, I feel bad. I there were all great choices, but it's gonna be Josie and the Pussycats.
I can't wait.
92 episodes in the making.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Can you
Anthony,
imagine how long I've waited for this moment?
I know, it's your Spice World. Well, thank you for listening, folks. We will see you next time. And as always, Anthony, please take us away.
I'll have what Josie's having.